The heat shimmered over the asphalt of the firing range, a liquid mirage dancing above the concrete and baked earth of Camp Lejeune. It was a place of precision, of controlled violence, where young men were forged into instruments of distance and death. Here, breath was a currency, and the space between heartbeats was a chasm of opportunity. Yet, for all its calculated order, a current of raw, untamed frustration crackled in the air. Sergeant Finch, an instructor whose voice was a permanent rasp of gravel and authority, paced the line like a caged predator. His recruits, sweat-soaked and tense, were failing. They were failing spectacularly. The target, a small steel plate shimmering 1,000 yards distant, remained untouched, a silent monument to their inadequacy. Each missed shot was a fresh insult, another crack in the foundation of his reputation as a kingmaker in the unforgiving world of Marine Corps Scout snipers. Pathetic, Finch barked, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence that followed another errant ping in the dirt berm. You call yourselves riflemen? My grandmother could shoot better than this, and she's been dead for 10 years. Read. He snapped his head toward his subordinate, a young corporal whose ambition burned as brightly and hotly as the Carolina sun. What is this? Did we recruit from a knitting circle? Corporal Reed, eager to please and deflect the heat, scanned the area for a distraction, a target for their shared contempt. His eyes landed on the old man. He was always there, a ghost in custodial gray, moving at the periphery with a broom and a dustpan. He swept the brass casings that littered the ground, his movements slow, deliberate, a river of patience in a world of explosive urgency. His face was a roadmap of forgotten highways, his back slightly stooped, not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of years. To the young Marines, he was just part of the scenery, as inanimate as the ammo cans and the target stands. Look at him, Reed said, a smirk pulling at his lips. He gestured with his chin. Maybe we should get some tips from the janitor. Hey, old man, you think you could hit that? The old man, Silas, paused his sweeping. He didn't look up immediately. He seemed to be considering the dust in his pan, as if it held more interest than the shouted words of a boy in uniform. He had heard it all before. The casual disrespect, the dismissive tone that categorized him as little more than a piece of living equipment. He had learned long ago that silence was a shield, and humility a fortress. When he finally lifted his eyes, they were a pale, washed-out blue, the color of a winter sky. They held no anger, no indignation. They were just still. I'm just here to clean, Corporal, he said, his voice quiet, weathered, like old leather. Finch strode over, seeing an opportunity for a lesson in humiliation. That's right. You're here to clean up after real Marines. Men who do things. Men who serve. You see this rifle? He patted the M40A6 resting on the sandbags. This is a tool of consequence, not a broom. You probably wouldn't even know which end the bullet comes out of, the recruits snickered, the tension on the line momentarily broken by this new, easier target. Silas simply nodded, a gesture of placid acceptance that seemed to infuriate Finch even more. The sergeant wanted a reaction. He wanted fear, or shame, or at least a flicker of resentment. He got nothing but a quiet dignity that was as impenetrable as armor plate. The old man's stillness was a void that swallowed his aggression, leaving him feeling strangely hollow and even more enraged. He needed to break it. He needed to prove that the uniform and the rank he wore made him matter more than this stooped, silent figure. The sun beat down, a relentless hammer. The recruits shifted on their mats, the leather of their slings creaking. 1,000 yards away, the steel target waited, indifferent. It had been a long morning, and the heat was making tempers short and patience thin. The challenge was a cold-bore shot, the first round fired from a clean, cool barrel, the one that mattered most in a real-world scenario. It demanded a perfect understanding of atmospheric conditions, of the rifle's unique temperament, of the subtle whisper of the wind. The young Marines, products of a digital age, were accustomed to data and immediate feedback. They struggled with the instinct, the art, the feel of it. Finch's voice grew louder, his insults more pointed. You are not thinking. You are stabbing at the trigger like you're trying to kill a snake with a stick. You have to become the rifle. You have to feel the wind on your face, not just read it on your kestrel. He kicked at a spent casing near Silas's feet. Even he knows that. Don't you, Pops? Wind's tricky today. Silas didn't respond. He simply continued his slow, methodical work, his broom whispering across the concrete. But his eyes were not on the ground. They were distant, scanning the heat-distorted landscape, noting the sway of the tall grass on the berm, the subtle drift of dust near the target line. His head tilted almost imperceptibly, a human weather vane. He could feel it. The wind was a liar today. It whispered one thing at the firing line, but held a different, more treacherous secret halfway to the target. It was a puzzle he had solved 1,000 times before, in places far hotter and far more dangerous than this. The smell of burnt cordite hung in the air, a familiar perfume that tugged at the frayed edges of his memory. For a fleeting moment, the concrete range dissolved. The air grew thick, humid, heavy with the scent of rot and green decay. The sharp crack of the rifles morphed into the muffled thump of an M79 grenade launcher. He could feel the weight of his own rifle, its wooden stock worn smooth by his hands, the cold kiss of its steel against his cheek. He was no longer an old man with a broom. He was a shadow in the jungle, a ghost with a scope, and the fate of the men around him rested on a single, controlled breath. He blinked, and the vision was gone. The Carolina sun was back, harsh and unforgiving. Sergeant Finch was standing over him now, his shadow a suffocating blanket. "I'm talking to you, old man. Did your ears stop working along with the rest of you?" Finch jabbed a finger toward the firing line. "Go stand over there, by the ammo cans. I want these recruits to get a good long look at what happens when you waste your life. You end up sweeping up brass for men half your age." A living, breathing lesson in failure, the command was so laced with contempt, so fundamentally cruel, that a few of the recruits shifted uncomfortably. This felt different. This wasn't the usual instructor bluster. This was personal. Humiliating. An old man felt wrong, a violation of some unspoken code. But no one dared to speak. Fear of Finch was a more immediate and tangible threat than a troubled conscience. Silas looked at the sergeant, his pale eyes holding the other man's gaze for a long moment. Then, without a word, he set his broom and dustpan carefully against the wall, as if they were cherished tools, and walked slowly toward the designated spot. His gait was steady, his back straight. He did not shuffle like a man ashamed. He walked like a man following an order, because that is what his body and soul had been trained to do for a lifetime. He stood by the ammo cans, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, a posture of quiet repose that seemed utterly out of place amidst the tension and failure of the sniper range. He was a statue of forgotten history, a silent witness to the arrogance of the present. Across the range, partially hidden in the shade of an observation tower, Gunnery Sergeant Hayes watched the scene unfold through his binoculars. He was an older Marine, a career man who had seen instructors like Finch come and go. He understood the need for pressure, for breaking men down to build them back up. But this was different. This was just cruelty. He had been watching the old janitor for weeks, intrigued by the man's economy of motion, the profound stillness he carried. There was a discipline in the way he swept, a precision in the way he stacked the trash bins. It was the ingrained muscle memory of a man who had lived a life of rigorous order. Today, as Finch berated him, Hayes focused his binoculars on the old man's hands. And then he saw it, faded and blurred by time and sun, but still visible on the wrinkled skin of his left wrist, was a small, crudely rendered tattoo. It was a skull wearing a green beret, with a dagger clenched in its teeth. Hayes felt a jolt, a sudden electric shock of recognition. It wasn't a standard military tattoo. It was something else entirely. Something older, more secret. It was the unofficial symbol of MACVSOG, the highly classified, multi-service Special Operations Unit that had conducted some of the most dangerous and clandestine missions of the Vietnam War. Men with that tattoo were ghosts. Legends. Most of them were dead. Hayes lowered his binoculars, his heart pounding. He looked at the stooped old man standing by the ammo cans, enduring the verbal abuse of a sergeant young enough to be his grandson. The dissonance was staggering. The world tilted on its axis. He had seen the way the old man's eyes tracked the wind, the way his body subtly aligned with the target line, an instinct so deep it was cellular. It wasn't the look of a janitor. It was the look of a hunter. A cold dread washed over Hayes. An institution was in the process of committing a cardinal sin, dishonoring one of its own prophets. He scrambled for his phone, his fingers fumbling with the screen. He had to make a call. There was only one man he knew who might be able to confirm his suspicion, a retired general who served as the unofficial historian and guardian of the Corps' most sacred legacies. He dialed the number, his breath held tight in his chest. As the phone rang, Finch's voice echoed across the range, escalating in its cruelty. He was now trying to force the recruits to use the old man as a reference point for wind calls. See that old-timer? If the wind blows his shirt to the left, you aim right. He's about as useful as a windsock, and just as full of hot air. The recruits remained silent, their rifles lowered. The exercise had ground to a halt. The air was thick with a shared, unspoken shame. Finch, sensing he was losing the room, decided to double down. He grabbed a spare cleaning rag, a small white cloth, and marched over to Silas. "Here," he snarled, shoving it into the old man's hand. "I want you to hold this. Hold it up. Let's see if these maggots can at least hit a moving target." He was suggesting they shoot near the old man, a flagrant and dangerous violation of every safety protocol. It was a desperate, ugly power play. Silas looked at the rag in his hand, then back at Finch. For the first time, a flicker of something hard and cold entered his pale blue eyes. It was not anger. It was something far older, far more dangerous. It was the look of a man who had stood on the precipice of annihilation and had not blinked. Before he could speak, a new sound cut through the tension. It was the crunch of tires on gravel, approaching at a speed that was both deliberate and urgent. A black, unmarked sedan with government plates rolled to a stop just behind the firing line. The dust it kicked up seemed to settle instantly, as if subdued by the vehicle's sheer presence. The rear door opened, and a man emerged. He was tall and straight, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that did little to hide the ramrod posture of a lifelong military officer. His hair was silver, his face was etched with authority, and on his lapel was the unmistakable miniature ribbon rack of a retired three-star general. It was General McAllister, a living legend, a man whose name was spoken with a mixture of fear and reverence in every corner of the Marine Corps. Silence fell over the range. It was absolute. Sergeant Finch froze, the sneer on his face melting into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Corporal Reed looked as if he might faint. The recruits snapped to attention, their backs rigid. General McAllister ignored all of them. His eyes, sharp and piercing, scanned the scene and locked onto the old man standing by the ammo cans, a white cleaning rag still clutched in his hand. The general's face, which had been a mask of stern neutrality, softened with something that looked like profound respect, and perhaps a deep sadness. He strode forward, his polished shoes making no sound on the dusty ground. He walked past the petrified sergeant, past the awestruck recruits, and did not stop until he was standing directly in front of Silas. Then, in a move that sent a seismic shockwave through every Marine present, General McAllister, a titan of the Corps, snapped to the sharpest, most precise position of attention he had executed in years. He raised his hand in a salute, his arm a rigid line of respect. The gesture was not for the flag, not for the uniform, but for the humble man in the janitor's gray. "Master Sergeant." The general's voice was a clear, commanding baritone that carried across the silent range. "It is an honor, sir. I apologize for the intrusion." Silas slowly, almost painfully, raised his own hand and returned the salute. It was a gesture born of ancient habit, a little shaky, but fundamentally perfect in its form. "At ease, General," Silas said, his quiet voice suddenly filled with an authority that dwarfed everyone else's. "You're a long way from home." McAllister dropped his salute, but remained at attention. He turned his head slightly, his gaze falling upon Sergeant Finch like a physical weight. The fury in the general's eyes was controlled, but it was the cold, terrifying fury of a collapsing star. "Sergeant," he began, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Do you have any idea who this man is? Do you have the faintest comprehension of the hallowed ground you are currently desecrating with your ignorance?" Finch could only stammer, his face pale. "Sir, he's the janitor." The general let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of any humor. "The janitor? Sergeant, you are standing in the presence of Master Gunnery Sergeant Silas Crane, a man your beloved Corps officially declared killed in action in 1971. You are looking at the man they called the ghost of the A Shao Valley, while you were learning to tie your shoes. This man was engaging enemy targets from distances your science fiction video games would call impossible. Using a rifle with a scope that had less technology than your wristwatch, he took a step closer to Finch, his voice dropping further, becoming a venomous whisper. This janitor holds the Distinguished Service Cross, 3 silver stars, and 5 purple hearts. He was a founding member of the STA project, the very program that evolved into what you now so arrogantly call your own. He wrote half the manuals you pretend to have read. He is not a lesson in failure, Sergeant. He is the reason you have the freedom to fail in the first place. Every word was a hammer blow. The recruits stared, mouths agape, their world reordering itself in real time. The old man sweeping the brass was not a relic. He was a foundational pillar. Corporal Reed looked like he wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. The shame was a physical thing now, a suffocating heat rising from the asphalt. McAllister wasn't finished. He pointed a rigid finger at the M40A6 resting on the shooting mat. Your rifle, Sergeant. Give it to him. Now Finch moved as if in a trance. He numbly unclipped the rifle from its bipod and carried it over, holding it out to Silas with trembling hands. He couldn't meet the old man's eyes. Silas looked at the weapon. It was a marvel of modern engineering, fiberglass stock, advanced optics, a precision-milled action. It was a world away from the modified Winchester Model 70 he had carried through the jungles of Southeast Asia. Yet, as his hands closed around it, a lifetime of muscle memory surged through him. The rifle settled into his shoulder as if it were a long-lost limb. It felt right. He moved with a fluid grace that defied his age, his body a study in practiced efficiency. He lay prone on the mat, his movements economical and sure. He didn't bother with the complex digital wind meters or the ballistic calculators. He simply closed one eye, his other peering downrange, his senses absorbing the world around him. He felt the subtle shift in the wind, the pressure of the air, the angle of the sun. The world narrowed to a tunnel, connecting his eye to the distant steel target. "One round, Sergeant?" Silas asked, his voice calm, directed at the still frozen Finch. "Just one," McAllister answered for him. "Show them, master guns. Show them what honor looks like." Silas worked the bolt with a smooth, practiced click-clack. He chambered around. His breathing slowed, becoming almost imperceptible. The young recruits watched, mesmerized. The transformation was absolute. The stooped, shuffling janitor was gone. In his place was a predator, a master of his craft, fused with his tool. He took a breath, let half of it out, and the world fell silent. The space between his heartbeats stretched into infinity. Then, the rifle cracked. It was a single, sharp, authoritative sound that echoed across the range. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, 1,000 yards away, a clear, high-pitched ping rang through the air, a perfect note of vindication. The steel target rocked back on its stand, a fresh mark gleaming on its center mass. A perfect shot. A cold bore, first-round impact on a target none of the students could touch. A collective gasp went through the recruits. It wasn't just a hit. It was an act of impossible artistry. It was a legend brought to life before their very eyes. Silas worked the bolt again, ejecting the spent casing, which spun through the air in a perfect golden arc. He pushed himself up, his movements once again slow and deliberate, the fire in his eyes receding back into the quiet depths. He held the rifle out to Sergeant Finch. Finch, his face a mess of shame, disbelief, and a dawning, horrified awe, could not bring himself to take it. His hands hung uselessly at his sides. General McAllister stepped forward and took the rifle from Silas himself. He then turned his full, undivided attention back to Finch and Reed. "You two will report to my office at 0800 tomorrow. You will bring your service records, because I want to see for myself what qualifications you think you possess that give you the right to disrespect a giant. You will then be reassigned. You will spend the next 6 months on mess duty. You will scrub pots, you will mop floors, and you will learn the single most important lesson the Marine Corps has to offer, that every job has dignity, and every person who serves, in any capacity, is owed a measure of respect. Am I understood?" "Yes, sir." They both mumbled, their voices barely audible. The general then addressed the recruits. "Let this be the most important lesson you ever learn on this range. The measure of a man is not the rank on his collar or the weapon in his hand. It is the quiet dignity in his soul and the unspoken history in his heart. Look around you. The world is full of men like Master Sergeant Crane. They are bagging your groceries, fixing your car, sweeping your floors. They are silent heroes who asked for nothing and gave everything. Your duty is not just to learn how to shoot. Your duty is to be worthy of their sacrifice. Dismissed, the recruits scrambled to gather their gear, their movements clumsy, their minds reeling. They kept stealing glances at Silas, who had retrieved his broom and was now calmly sweeping the single brass casing he had just ejected into his dustpan. The great circle was complete. General McAllister walked back over to Silas, his demeanor softening once more. "It was good to see you shoot again." Ghost Silas offered a small, sad smile. "The rifle is better." "The eyes are not. The eyes are just fine," McAllister said gently. "Why are you here, Silas? Why this?" Silas leaned on his broom, looking out at the distant hills. "After Martha passed, the house got too quiet. I needed noise. I needed to be around the sound of the Corps. It's the only music I know. And someone has to clean up the brass." The simplicity of the statement was profound. He wasn't there for glory or recognition. He was there to be close to the only family he had ever truly known, serving in the only way he felt he had left. Finch, his career in tatters, his arrogance shattered, took a hesitant step towards Silas. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. "Master Sergeant," he croaked, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. I am so sorry." Silas looked at the broken young man. He saw not an enemy, but a child who had been taught the wrong lessons. He reached out a wrinkled hand and placed it gently on the sergeant's shoulder. "Son," he said, his voice kind, "everyone makes mistakes. The mark of a good Marine isn't that he never falls. It's that he gets back up, learns his lesson, and drives on. Go learn yours." With that, he turned and continued his work, the soft shush of his broom on the concrete a gentle rhythm of forgiveness. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the range. The young Marines would talk about this day for the rest of their lives. They would tell the story of the old janitor who was a king, the day they learned that the most dangerous man on the base was the one holding a broom, and that true honor is not something you wear on your sleeve, but something you carry, silently and patiently, in your soul.